All right, sitting here with Dax Braxton, who was a survivor of the flood, the Great Flood of 2016. And Dax, we've heard your story, but we would like you to tell the ADRN audience, in your own words, what happened on Saturday when you first heard about the flood.
So I woke up about 8:15, 8:30, and made some coffee. Went to look out my back window to see how a catch basin, small drainage system I made for my AC was working. As soon as I opened the blinds, nothing but water everywhere. It's probably, I don't know, 1.5 to 2 at that time, and basically, panic is the first instinct, but then you shove that aside, and it's just survival mode. Get my family out, tell them, and so I woke my wife up and little girl and told them, we need to get out of here, grab what, the most important possessions that we have are. And so she did that, and she was freaking out a little bit, but I calmed her down enough to compose her thoughts. And one of my wife's car was blocking the driveway, her Camry. So I knew at that time there was no way that could make it out. So I just drove it into the street and then loaded everybody up in the truck and left. And two of the routes at this point, I already knew one was impassable. And when we made it right out of our neighborhood, I saw that the main street in Denham, which is Range, was already blocked at the Antique District. So we went up, made a detour through some other neighborhoods, and finally found a way to the interstate through Juban, and got my wife and kids back to my in-laws, which is 2 exits down on I-12, and immediately, as soon as I dropped them off, I came back to try and salvage any, other things that I could. But when I got back about a block from my house, it was way too deep at that point to drive my F-250 any further. So I left it running and waded through the water. It's about waist deep at this point. Made it to my house, got some more things, made 2 trips actually. And when I was driving back out of the neighborhood, a guy came down from across Range and told me, do not come this way, it's gotten way too deep. So I took a left in the opposite direction of where I need to go, and I'd say 100 yards after taking that left, my truck completely was stalled out, transmission sucked up water, that was it. So I climbed out of the window and waded through,
With a backpack on your back.
Yes, it was a backpack and my wife's wedding bag. That was the most important thing. She had forgotten her wedding box that had our DVD and napkins from the wedding, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that was strapped to my backpack. And an off-duty state trooper was at the high school, which is where my truck broke down, and towed my truck about, I don't know, 200 feet where the ground was higher, and that was as far as he could do it. He had other things he had to do. Well, I tried to start it, jump start the starter solenoid, no go. So at that point, I used another person. There was several people standing by watching what was happening, and I asked one of them for their phone because my phone had obviously gotten water damage when I had to hop out, and called my wife. My mother-in-law said the interstate was already closed at that point, so there's basically no way for them to get back to me. So I didn't really know what I was going to do at that point, and luckily a neighbor drove down that street and right by me to look. He was trying to get back to his house to see how it was going, but realized quickly he couldn't. and offered to pay him some money to bring me an alternate route to try and get back to my in-laws to be with my wife and daughter. About an hour, it would have taken about an hour and a half to go a 10-minute drive, you know. And so we do that and end up getting stuck on I-12. I don't know, we got no more than 5 miles down I-12, and there was a river going in front of us and one behind us, and we ended up being stuck there for 9 hours. We were hearing things that the governor and state police, nobody knew how they were exactly going to evacuate all of us out of there, but finally we heard word that everybody was to turn around. Every normal civilian vehicle was to turn around and go through the less dangerous river that was behind us and get to a shelter. And all the 18-wheelers had to stay though, because obviously there was no way for them to turn around on one side of the interstate. And I'm not really sure what, I think those guys ended up having to just wait it out like 30-something hours before they could finally leave. But so we get back to the shelter in, I believe it was Walker. We tried like 4 different shelters, all of them were packed to the brim. Finally found one at a junior high school, and it was a miserable night being there, soaking wet. Already, you know, I was soaking wet clothes for probably 12 hours at this point, and we're just in a gymnasium with fans blowing, so you know, all you can do is sit on the floor, you know, and people were yelling all night, the lights were on all night. It was basically just miserable. I knew after staying there that night there was no way I was going to another, and the next morning I got the guy my neighbor who originally was going to drive me to drive me as far as he could down the interstate, or to the interstate. I didn't really know how far we'd get, because we heard that where we were was basically an island, and everywhere around us was just surrounded by water. There was no getting in or getting out. And so we got to, we went on I-12 at the Walker exit, and probably got, I don't know, 1/8 of a mile, 1/4 of a mile, and there was just nothing but water on our side, so there's no going through it. But I did see some 18-wheelers do it, and they made it around the bend as far as we could see, so I figured, hey, maybe they're tall enough to get out of there. So the next time a truck came with a boat, and I asked them if they would mind giving me a ride as far as they were going, but they were only going one more exit up, and then they were going to take the boat to rescue some of his family members. Well, this guy had a 4x4 truck with a 7 or 12-inch lift, okay, and his transmission sucked up water. So I mean, this is a very tall truck, and this was probably, I don't know, a few hundred feet away from the Jubin exit on ramp, and so I just hopped out then into above waist deep water. Probably this is up to my chest most likely, and waded to the center barrier and climbed up it, which you don't realize how tall it is. With a backpack, it was kind of hard throwing it over, but I get over it, and on the other side it's a lot better. There's still a lot of water, but the majority of it is, you know, ankle to shin deep. And then there's a lot of dry spots as well, you know. So I started walking, and before we had left the shelter, I made sure to pack one of the MREs they were giving out into my backpack, and one bottle of Dasani that I'd gotten out of a vending machine in the lobby there, and started walking, and immediately, I mean, within just a few minutes, since my rubber lacrosse boots were soaking wet, my Achilles tendon both of them were shredded, and my pinky toes and one of my big toes was already rubbed raw. So I try, this, where I started, it's approximately 10 miles where I was trying to get to the Millerville exit, and I didn't know what I was going to come across, but I knew that most likely the center barrier, if there were any impassable spots, the center barrier would be tall enough for me to be able to traverse it and get across whatever body of water was going to be on the interstate. And started walking. Immediately there's a little baby deer who was terrified, trying to find higher ground, tried to get to it, but it's too scared. It ran away and ran back into the water, so I know it didn't make it. And as I was, I guess, probably 2 miles at this point, I came to and walked under an overpass where there was a break in the center barrier. It started a couple of feet over and then continued on, and water was rushing out of this probably 50 miles an hour if I had to guess. I mean, it was really going. It wasn't super deep, but it was moving fast, and I guess it was probably 40 to 50 feet wide, and I kind of hesitated for a second because I knew I didn't really know if it was going to sweep me completely off my feet and take me into a large body of water that was on the other side of the overpass, or if I was going to be able to make it. And so I just made sure to plant each step very firmly, and I think because I had such a heavy backpack on, that it helped me get across it without, getting swept away. And so I made it across that, and let me tell you, I was praying hard on those 40 feet, real hard. And after that, I took my boots off because they were soaking from that, and tied them to my backpack, and was walking with just my socks on. And they were everywhere I looked, and this happened from the beginning of where I started walking. There were chunks of armadillo flesh about the size of my hand just kind of floating, or I'd see them right by the barricade or in the water, and it was just really weird. And so as my feet are cut up and I'm walking in my socks, I started thinking, well, don't these things carry leprosy, and maybe I shouldn't be walking barefoot. But at that point, I don't think it really mattered because so much of the water was getting into my boot. But also further down, this is probably a mile after those rapids, there was a coiled cottonmouth. And now I know there's a lot down here, but I rarely ever have run into one. And as I was walking this whole time, the only way to power through my feet killing me is to just be in machine mode and not focus on anything except saying things with each step. Whether, I would say, thank you God, thank you Jesus, over and over, or I would count 1, 2, 1, 2, just whatever I could that was very monotonous, in that as well. And so anyways, I'm just walking, and there's debris everywhere, and I almost stepped right on a coiled up water moccasin who was on a little piece of higher ground on the other side of the interstate. And it really kind of freaked me out for a second because I must have been, 18 inches from it. And as soon as I walked past, I was thinking, man, I can't believe that thing didn't strike at my ankle, But I'm sure it was too terrified from everything it had just gone through. And so I keep walking, a couple more miles, and also there's dead rats everywhere, dead and alive rats, and little mice huddling in onto the barricade. Everything was clinging to this center barricade for dear life, including me, And I get over the Denham Springs overpass, and there was a massive body of water because the Amy River is now very close to where I was, and I see it and I'm like, there's no way I'm swimming through this or wading through it. Like, it's just not gonna happen. So I kick my shoes, my boots off, and take my backpack off, set it on top of the center barrier, and climb up there. And then I stood up, got my backpack, and that took everything I had to kind of keep my balance and pull that thing on. And when I looked across, and this is probably, I don't know, 400 or 500 yards long, that I would have had to walk on an 8-inch wide concrete barrier. And I just knew there's no way, not with an 80 to 100 pound backpack on. I didn't even know if I could do it without it, but I knew there was no way I would, be able to have that on. So that was a little upsetting, thinking that I was going to have to leave that backpack with the wedding stuff and some of my keepsakes that I went through this whole ordeal for, and but. I was over it at that point. It was just getting back to my wife and kid. That was all that mattered. And luckily, on the other side, a old Vietnam era deuce-and-a-half military vehicle drove up to the water's edge from the other side. Kind of stood there for a couple of, I don't know, it seemed like a while, but it was probably only 30 seconds. And then he started coming across, and I really thought this dude was crazy because I did not think he was going to make it.
And before that, you had mentioned about not getting picked up. How did you do that?
Yeah, right. So in between that time and when I crossed those really fast rapids, there was another overpass that I went under in between there with a lot of people, and most of them looked to be National Guard and Sheriff's office affiliated people. And I was worried the whole time that they were going to see me and pick me up and take me back to a shelter, which I desperately did not want, because that would have just delayed me seeing my family even more, and it would have put me back in misery. And so I just kind of kept my head down and kept a steady pace and just didn't want anybody to think I needed help, or I just tried to remain unnoticed, and luckily nobody said anything to me. I did have a news helicopter that was I had seen for a ways, because when you're on the interstate you can see miles and miles, and for a while I'd been seeing it way far down, going up and down the interstate view, taking video of the water. And when I got closer, it started circling around me, so that made me kind of nervous that they were going to swoop down and try and rescue me or something, but they never did, thankfully. And so back to when that deuce-and-a-half crosses probably the most dangerous part, because I don't think nobody was supposed to be on the interstate at this point. It was considered very dangerous, It's blocked off for miles and miles and miles. And the deuce-and-a-half comes by, and I'm standing on the barricade when he gets beside me, and I just yelled, "Hey, will you please give me a ride to the other side?" And he said, yeah, he would, which I was really surprised. I didn't think he would, but at this point, I didn't have a chance. I knew if I tried to cross that I probably ended up tiring out in the center of it and having to straddle a concrete barrier with nothing but hell and hell on each side of me, which was just wouldn't have been nice. So he gives me a ride to the other side, and then I end up making it to Millerville, and finally get to the beginning of my in-laws' neighborhood. And you talk about relief and just thanks then, because I really didn't. There were times when I thought I wasn't gonna make it at all, and I really thought that was reality, but I just kept trying to convince myself that wasn't gonna be reality, and it ended up working out. And but I got to the beginning of their neighborhood, and it was completely flooded. I mean, like 2.5, 3 feet. So now I'm thinking they've already left, and I'm gonna miss them again. And I there was a guy standing on his porch on one of the houses. I asked to use his phone. He let me, and my wife was freaking out, couldn't believe that I'd actually made it to the neighborhood, and said yeah, she was there, but they were just contemplating evacuating or calling for help because it was coming up so fast. So I finally waded through their neighborhood. It was water the entire way, another quarter of a mile, and that really wore me out because I was already dead tired at this point. And get to their house, immediately take a shower and eat a sandwich because I didn't really eat anything for these 2 days, just from being stressed out about not being with my family. I just didn't want any food. I just wanted to get there. And as soon as I do that, my mother-in-law or wife yells to me to come look at the water. And since I had been there, which was only maybe an hour and a half, it was at a couple of feet up the driveway. Now it was at the door in the courtyard. So I knew then, since my wife is pregnant and I have a 16-month-old daughter, that I had to get them out now, because sitting on a hot asphalt roof for however long it would take was out of the question. And so I told my wife to call the sheriff's department. She did, and they said it would be 2 to 3 days because people were still trapped on the rooftops. And that just wasn't that. I was like, oh no, what are we gonna do now? And so I went out to the front and just stood there for a while, and finally a guy in a bateau comes along, and he says, yeah, I'll take you to the National Guard holding spot. So we load up everybody, my mother-in-law, wife, daughter, my mother-in-law's cat, and my bulldog. And he takes us, we have to trek through some muddy stuff, but at least he got us through the real deep water. And at this point it starts raining really hard. And it's like, man, I'm sick of water at this point. It's been non-stop water for 2 days. Everywhere I look, on me, I've been in soaking wet clothes. And so anyways, we get hauled into another military vehicle and get put on a city bus, and then the city bus takes us to another shelter in Baton Rouge. And on the city bus, the bus driver had the AC completely blaring, so my mother-in-law's a real tiny woman. She's shivering. I'm thinking everybody's about to get hypothermia. That's how freezing we were. And I was just laughing to myself thinking it's August in Louisiana, and I'm sitting here feeling like it's the Antarctic. It was just insane. But my aunt picked us up from the shelter, and we at least had a bed to sleep in that night. So I was very thankful that how everything worked out.
And you went back to your mother-in-law's house, and
oh yeah. And so I guess 2 days later we were able to get a vehicle to go back to my mother-in-law's house, and it had never flooded, and it was a major blessing because they had 0 flood insurance, and my father-in-law is currently sick, terminally ill, cancer patient. So if we would have lost that house, it wouldn't have been bad. It would have been real bad, And so everything we couldn't be more thankful. It was very hard and trying, but we're blessed, really. It could have went. It could have been a lot worse.